waiting room, right, Corinne? Okay,
No.
go ahead, Paschalin and Robert, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I'm sure Karen and Robert will be checking whether there's anyone in the waiting room or in the list. So thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are connecting us from. My name is Paschalin Basil. I'm a young researcher, an early career researcher from the University of Nairobi at the Institute for Development Studies. But above all, I am a VREF NextGen resource person. With Robert Ambunda will be speaking to us shortly, and they will be co-moderating this session. And we are happy to be joined today with Mark. We can't wait to hear from Mark with his great presentation. So I'll ask Robert to say hi to us. Robert, please.
All right, thank you, Paschalin. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces here. So it's already feeling like home. As mentioned by Paschalin, my name is Robert Ambunda from the University of Namibia, and we are co-resource persons for the VREF NextGen initiative. And we have a lot of exciting initiatives planned for you guys. So welcome, and we'll talk as time goes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Robert. We had 49 people registered, like I mentioned a while ago, and we are hoping that quite a number of us can join us. And we are also spreading the word around so that I know there are so many young researchers, early career researchers out there. We'll be happy to reach out the word to all of them. So thanks once again for finding time to join us. This moment, I would like to call upon Jen to give his word. Welcome, Jen.
Thanks very much, Paschalin and Robert. I'm Jane Summerton. I'm the scientific advisor to VREF. I'm standing in for our director, Henrik Normark, who couldn't make it at the last minute, but sends his best to everyone. I'm sure you recognize his name and his face from other forums we've had. Just three short comments. You are part of the VREF community, mobility and access in African cities. And this is part of our initiative called the Next Generation MAC initiative. And what we're going to be doing is having a specific set of initiatives, events, activities, online and otherwise, for master students, PhD students, early career researchers, that is within 5 years after the PhD. It's not based on chronological order, age, or anything. And we will be doing, planning a number of activities coming up. And it's a new initiative. We're very excited about it. As part of this, as you've already been indicated, Paschalin and Robert, we have appointed them to be our special, what should I say, envoy, contact persons for this. So if you have ideas or thoughts about things that you would like to see happening for this community of next generation researchers in transport and mobility and access, please feel free to reach out to Paschalin and Robert, and we're going to be getting back to you later on. One more thing I would like to again mention, the new initiative, the African Research Program, which is a call for expressions of interest to build up a whole new research capacity in Sub-Saharan Africa in mobility, access, and transport. And it's on the webpage, and we urge you to check it out. And it's a major initiative for us. We're leaving the status of having smaller projects to really fund a larger program because we know the capacity is out there. So that's all I'd like to say, and please feel free to contact us. Thanks very much, Paschalin and Robert. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Jen, for that word of welcoming. And for those who are just joining us, we have just started. We are excited to see you on board. We request that you stay muted. You can put on your camera, but let us stay muted until it is our time to speak. Make use of the chat. We'll be talking there. So let me call upon Robert to introduce our presenter of today, Mark. Robert, please.
All right. Thank you, Paschalin. Thank you, Jane, for the strong words of welcome. You know, I remember the first time I submitted my first journal paper, and well, not a surprise, it was rejected. But the feeling of disappointment was quite horrible. So I think obviously, if we had forums like this, I could have handled it better. So I'm quite excited that even though it's a bit late, I've already submitted that paper a long time ago. I think for other scholars, it might be timeous that it's here now, and we can all learn a word or two, some what to do's, what not to do. And we can obviously submit better papers for a better impact. So to, as young scholars, we have some very key questions that we like to ask ourselves before we submit our papers to journals. So one of those key questions is, what distinguishes scholarly research from other forms of knowledge? And why do these differences matter when considering publication strategies? What ethical guidelines should we consider or should we follow when submitting our work? And why and how can we apply different strategies for citing or being cited in order to make sure that our papers have better visibility and have better impact on other researchers' work? So to help us engage these issues, we have a special guest today, and that special guest is Prof. Mark. So just a few introductory words about Prof. Mark. So Prof. Mark is a SANRAL endowed Chair of Transport Planning and Engineering, as well as the Head of Department in the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And he's a B-rated researcher with the National Research Foundation in South Africa. So B-rated researchers enjoy considerable international recognition by their peers for, firstly, the high quality and impact of their recent research. And you'd be surprised to know he's the only B-rated transportation professional in South Africa. So I think he deserves a round of applause for that. Yeah. So until 2022, he was also a visiting professor at Sungkyung Kwan University in Seoul, South Korea, where he taught climate change and the impact of climate change on cities and infrastructure. And he's the associate editor for the Elsevier Journal of Transport Geography, as well as the Journal of the South African Institution of Civil Engineering. And that's together with Prof. Roger Behrens, who's also a member of our VREF network. And you'd also like to know that Prof. Mark and Prof. Roger Behrens are the founders of the new Elsevier Journal on African Transport Studies, which will be launched shortly. So we have to look out for that, and let's make sure that we submit our papers to it. Mark's research focuses on the development and application of quantitative techniques for modeling and assessment of transport systems in the context of developing countries. And more specifically, he looks at spatial and network models for transport justice studies, choice modeling for modeling transport behavior in Africa, as well as the optimization of transportation systems using meta-heuristics and simulation-based optimization. He visited and worked in more than 20 countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And I'm happy to say that Namibia is one of those. And we have quite a nice relationship with Mark and the Center of Transport Studies. He has also co-authored over 100 peer-reviewed journals and conference articles. And something exciting, if you want to know where it all started with Mark, it started with VREF. So in 2005, when he was a young researcher as us, he received a small project grant from VREF, which kickstarted his international research career. So we have someone who's not only going to speak about the journey, but someone who's also walked the journey in terms of being a young researcher, receiving the support that they received, and being here today as an internationally recognized researcher who will share some information with us. So, Prof. Mark, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Robert and Paschalin, for this wonderful introduction. Can you confirm that you're seeing my slides?
Yes,
Good.
we can, Mark.
Okay, then I can proceed. So just a disclaimer. Whatever I'm going to present about today doesn't mean that all your articles will now be accepted in one round. Actually, that never happens. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is that publishing and peer review mean that we will see revisions and rejections, and even rejections of very good papers by very good authors. But I guess in the end of the presentation, I will make you realize that actually that's a good thing. Yeah, it actually keeps us sharp and makes sure that we do things better the next time. So greetings from very cold Cape Town, and I'm really excited to be part of this forum. I'm even more excited to see at least four of my former students or visitors, some of them who are actually very well published, to be part of this. So thank you also to, amongst others, Dorcas, Abisai, Samuel Kwame, to be here. I'm really good. So research publication, that's the topic of today's seminar. And up front, I would like to say research publication is regarded generally as a currency in the academic world. So it's a currency that you can exchange for funding, for reputation, for tenure and position. And I think whether you like it or not, research publication is part of the system. Actually, this academic publishing system has been around for hundreds of years. It has changed recently with internet and online publishing, obviously, but the principles of peer review, the systems of peer review are still the same. And initially, it will look very daunting on you, but once you get the hang of it, once you understand how to do it, you actually will get published and you will get cited. So as Robert kindly said, I will share my story of how I navigated this landscape, including the pitfalls and the pathways, as the title says. So my presentation will have 4 parts. First, I will speak very briefly about the nature of scientific publication, to basically make the argument that scientific publication is different from non-scientific work. And it's essential to realize that, because editors, myself and reviewers will look at the science of your work submitted. Yeah. So once we establish what scientific publication is, I want to talk briefly about ethics and professionalism in scientific publication, because also that is one of the pitfalls when we submit our work. People, reviewers and editors will check for ethics and professionalism. So we need to be aware of that, and you need to understand what the implications are. Then I will spend a bit longer time on the practice of getting your work published. And I will show you that science and ethics part are actually essential elements to get your work published. And finally, I will talk about the visibility, your visibility, because especially nowadays, there's about 5,000 articles published every day. And ultimately, you want to be cited because, as I said, citations are the currency that we need as academics. So I will talk about that briefly as well. And I hope you get excited about that. So part 1, the nature of scientific publication. So scientific articles, and I will mostly talk today about journal articles, but the same applies to peer-reviewed conferences. So whenever I talk about a journal article, you can read a peer-reviewed journal conference article as well. They report on research. Yeah? And research comes from the French word rechercher, which means to look for something, to investigate, to find out. So essential to research is that it's about discovery. So we are about to discover. We want to write about things that we discover, things that were previously completely or partially unknown or not understood. Yeah. This, by extension, then means that your article should discuss something that is new or something that was previously unknown. If you're just describing something that was known already, if you're just describing something that has not been systematically investigated, it is not research, and chances are that the conference or the journal will not accept it. There are exceptions to this. Some type of articles do not present new research. For example, review articles or meta-analysis articles, but I will talk about it later. So what is something new? So something new to be discovered, maybe new facts about the natural world. That's what natural scientists do a lot. The built, engineered world, I think that's what the transport fraternity does a lot. Or human society, which is also part of the VREF's mandates. We want to discover a new understanding of the processes in this natural world, this built environment world, or in human society. We would like to discover new or improved methods to investigate these, or new or improved systems or models, or a new synthesis or a new conceptual framework of existing facts. So in our context, that of MAC, that could be a better understanding of the drivers and motivations of pedestrian crossings on freeways, for example, or new methods to monitor paratransit operations, or the development of a livelihood framework to understand the adverse effects of mobility restrictions on women in, say, rural Africa. So we do research for several reasons, which could be, and I put them here in order of increased understanding, to explore a poorly understood situation or phenomenon, generate research questions and hypotheses. Or we do it to describe a situation or phenomenon. Or we do it to explain, to some level of understanding, the causes of a certain phenomenon, to predict the future or to simulate scenarios at unobserved locations or unobserved situations using some kind of model. Or fifth, to guide decisions which must be taken. These verbs, these five verbs, are typically also used when stating the objectives of your research and should actually come back in your article as well. And then you need to report on that. So we do the research applying the scientific method, and I believe that was part of a previous forum, which is a standardized set of techniques for building scientific knowledge, such as how to make valid observations, how to interpret results, and how to generalize those results. So the scientific method that you are applying in your research must satisfy a number of characteristics. So first of all, science is self-critical. It is never complete and has built-in mechanisms to check and revise itself. So keep this in mind, because it will come back when you're publishing. Yeah? Science is reproducible. So another worker or another academic can or should be able to perform the same experiment or same observation and expect to obtain same result or similar results, at least within the limits of experimental or contextual error. Research needs to be traceable, so traceability is very important. It is clear how the observations were made and how they relate to theory and or generalized concepts. So you're describing this in your articles. Science has a built-in self-correction mechanism. So other scientists can verify, modify, contradict, or extend surprising or controversial results by reading your work, by commenting on your work. There's no hidden knowledge in science. So in principle, any person can acquire all the knowledge needed to do and to understand science. There's actually no appeal to authority. It doesn't matter whether you're a full professor or a PhD student. Science is also not prescriptive. It's not prescriptive, so it cannot say what is the right course of action. It's built from that scientific method. So what is the role of research publication in this? So research publication, either in conferences or in journals, and the peer review process that checks the validity, the significance, and originality allow us to communicate research findings to other researchers in line with these principles of the scientific method and the characteristics of science as I described just now. As such, scientific work distinguishes itself from other non-scientific works, such as reports, commissioned work, or consultancy work. So I like this quote here: science is fundamentally a cumulative enterprise. So each new discovery plays the role of one more brick in an edifice. So how do we do this science ethically, and how do we report on it ethically? Yeah? So all researchers, you and me, are expected to observe the highest standards of integrity, honesty, and professionalism, and to embed good practice in every aspect of our work, yeah? Both when doing the research as well as when reporting on it. Yeah? This is part of ethics, which refers to a correct behavior within some social setting. So when you look at scientific ethics, I always like to use two types of definitions. One is the narrow definition. It's actually the rules of conduct when following scientific procedures, when doing the research, as well as when communicating the research. But in the wider sense, it's also our scientific activity in general. Yeah, its relation to society and societal development. I will concentrate mostly on the narrow sense now. So when looking at the narrow sense, there are two main principles that are very important. First of all, it's honesty. Yeah? So there is a true real world, and only by honest science it can be successfully understood. Yeah? So remember also that science is building on previous work. So credit for work performed by others is very important. Reputation is the currency of the scientific world. So you are building on other people's work, which you need to credit so that they get the reputation and you get the reputation going forward. Unfortunately, as an editor of 2 journals, we come across scientific fraud not very often, but we do see it regularly. Yeah. And what is scientific fraud? Yeah. So it's any action which willfully or which intends to deceive, so which intends to misrepresent the truth. That is different from sloppy, erroneous work, which is poor science, but is not fraud. It's the peer review system, which is actually there to filter through that sloppy work or the errors in the work. Yeah? But when someone is willfully trying to deceive, reviewers or editors may not pick it up. Yeah? So that's why I want to make a distinction between error, misconduct, and fraud. Yeah? So let me talk about fraud first. So there are 3 types of fraud. Yeah? One is fabrication, and it happens, it really happens, where people make up data, lying about procedures followed. There's falsification, where you manipulate data or not to obtain a predetermined conclusion. Yeah? That's searching for that positive outcome, yeah? Leaving out the negative outcome. Or there's plagiarism, taking credit for someone else's work as if it's your own work. So scientific fraud is the pinnacle of what should not happen in science, but there's also misconduct, and that's more a gray area where you as a scientist may have a conflict of interest that you're not reporting, or you have a publication bias where you're only reporting the nice things and the not so nice things you're actually not writing down in your publication, or you give away, or you are an undeserved author on a publication. Yeah? All those things threaten the validity of research results, and with that, the credibility of science. So this publication, or this figure, actually shows it nicely how we move from error via misconduct to fraud. So error speaks to the wrong observations, the wrong analysis, yeah? which with good mentorship, with good supervision, with good research, taking time to do the research, can be avoided. Misconduct is intentional. It's not declaring some conflict of interest by being biased in what you are reporting, by giving authorship to the wrong people. And that moves to fraud when you're suppressing data, plagiarizing, falsifying, or fabricating data. Yeah? If this happens, you literally get blacklisted, hopefully also by your own employers, but also by the journals that you submit to. So I just want to give that as a warning. Then in a wider sense, when as a researcher, you need to understand your role and responsibilities in society. Yeah. So this relates to things like scientific integrity, which we just spoke about. So that's within how you behave within the research community. Then human rights and dignity. So when you are working with community, so your protection of participants is an important part of this. And the collaboration between science and society. So the value and role of research in society. all these three aspects together should be looked at when doing science and when reporting on science. So these principles also make that participation in studies, and that's what we do a lot in transport, should always be voluntary, informed, and safe for those who participate. So let's now talk about publishing your research. So what is publishing? So publishing is the process of systematically documenting and presenting your research results so that they can be reproduced by others, as the results are now traceable, following that the characteristics of scientific research, or others can acquire the relevant outcomes quickly without having to reproduce your research and basically build on what you've done, and or others can modify, extend your work, and then cite you as being the basis on which they are building. So why do we do this? We do this for the societal benefit your research may have, to justify the national or international, look at Volvo, taxpayers' money going into your research, to measure our productivity as academics, and for some of you to actually obtain a degree, because it's a mastery requirement for a PhD in some universities for a master's. So to write an article needs to have a clear structure to its argument, and the argument is following that objective that we spoke about before. So the new elements that you want to report on. You're referencing other literature, and you have to do that accurately and correctly, and I will talk about that later. Your article needs to offer a concise overview of the methods applied and the justification thereof, and the findings. And what makes it hard, it's typically bound by a very tight word count, typically 6,000 to 8,000 words. So the structure, and I found this very difficult to write this down because there are probably many structures that can work. But if I look at my own work, which is a bit more on the quantitative side of things, a typical structure that works for me is obviously a title, which is short, clear, inviting, but most importantly, capturing some important keywords that people can search on. When people search for articles, that your article pops up. It has an abstract which summarizes the research focus, which helps the reader to ascertain its purpose, which you probably write at the very end. But be careful, my experience as well, don't write it the last minute, because the abstract is the first thing that the reviewers read when deciding or not, or when deciding to like your article or not, and it can actually put them at the wrong foot immediately. Then an introduction, obviously, it offers the rationale for the paper, the problem formulation, and an overview to the specifics of the research questions, objectives, etc. Some people would actually separate an introduction and a research design. That's all valid. Then obviously there's literature, and literature is essential. And still I see articles coming to my desk that do not have a literature review. But if you understand what the scientific method is and the fact that we are building on other work in science, of course there should be a literature review. So you refer to other relevant literature and you discuss and you make very explicit where your work fits in. Then you describe data and methods, assuming there are data and methods, and you describe the data, methods, and procedures that you use to reach your conclusions. And then you describe your results, your findings, which you should describe and comment on. Too often we see papers where there's just a repetition of the numbers that you put in your graph. Now, actually, the results need to be put in context and be discussed in the next section, where actually you're saying, what does this mean? What are the implications of my findings and the impact on whatever topic you're addressing? Then you have your conclusions and recommendations, which you can split as well, or you have it as one section, and you conclude on your main objectives and questions, and you propose follow-up work. And with doing that, you invite others to actually continue your work. And then finally, you have a reference list. And I'm sorry to put it very explicitly, but you have to double check your citations versus your reference list versus the compulsory journal referencing style. Every journal has a compulsory referencing style, which you need to follow. Yeah? If you don't follow that style, your paper may be desk rejected. Also, too often you find a lot of citations in the text itself, but the references do not appear in the list or the other way around. So if you use some electronic literature repository like Mendeley, then that all works out itself. But many of us don't use that. And then you have to just check at the end of your writing whether everything is complete, because these are the small things that can make the difference between receiving a reject or not. So how do you sell your work? How do you make an article that really stands out? So of course it needs to have a clear structure, an outline and paragraphs with topic sentences. Yeah? If you want to know more about it, I can share some other presentations about how to actually write a coherent structure and how you deal with topic sentences and paraphrasing and other things like that. You need to be short and to the point. Remember, the article is 6,000 to 8,000 words. Yeah, so you just need to put relevant information and make it easy to read, but it is probably very dense. Yeah, that's the nature of articles. Yeah, so you cannot sacrifice relevant detail. So it is a bit of a trade-off that we will speak about later on in the workshop as well. You need to use clear, concise language, sound logic, and argumentation. And actually, and unfortunately, most journals are in English, and if English is not your mother tongue, like in my case, it's sometimes very difficult to write good English. So don't be ashamed and use language editors, and I will talk to that point as well later. Yeah? But make sure no vague statements. Use the right model qualifiers when writing your argument. So the statements that you make need to have the right strength, depending on the facts that you observed in your data. Yeah? So don't overdo and don't underdo. Yeah? Make sure that the relations with related work are very clear, from the introduction to the discussion to the conclusion. So show why is your work important? What did the others not do that you are doing? How are your results related to others? Are they confirming it? Are they modifying it? Are they rejecting other work? Yeah, that's very important. Make that very clear. Yeah? And the related work in the journal you are submitting to. I will talk to that as well in a few minutes, but it's important that if you plan to submit your work to case studies in transport policy, make sure you are actually showing that this paper fits in the journal because other work in the journal relates to the work that you're presenting. And finally, correct paraphrasing, correct citations, and a complete reference list in the prescribed referencing style are very, very important. Yeah? So most journals require to use an Harvard style or the APA style. You just download it and you follow that structure. Then a few words about authorship. So each person who makes a meaningful contribution to your research project should somehow be credited in your publication. That could be either as an author or you use an acknowledgement section for that. Yeah? So typically an author is someone who makes a significant or substantial contribution. So the person you're acknowledging assisted in some way, but was not significantly or substantially involved in the production of the publication. Each author that you list should have participated in formulating the research problem and or analyzing and or interpreting the data and or have made other substantially scholarly efforts, maybe in organizing the research, they should have participated in the writing of the paper and should have approved, and all of them should have approved the final version for publication and be prepared to defend the publication against criticism. Yeah? So every author in the end of the day should have read the publication before submission. And too often that doesn't happen. The order of the authors is a very delicate topic. Yeah? But it's important to understand that the first author or the dual first authors, so the first two, typically are seen as the main person. So if you are writing your PhD, in my view, and most professors would agree with me, the PhD student is typically the first author. Yeah? The person doing most of the work, taking most of the credits. The last author, and it depends on the field a bit, I believe in social sciences and in health, the last author is considered a senior author. Yeah. So if there are discussions about authorship, it typically happens around the first or the last. Yeah. And if you can't agree, and it happened to me twice if I'm not mistaken, you must agree on an alphabetical order. Yeah, and with my family name, I suddenly become the senior author, even as a junior researcher. Yeah. And the corresponding author, that's also what you have to indicate. And the corresponding author is the one who will be dealing with the whole peer review process and is the first point for call for the journal to go to. I don't like gift authorships. Honorary or courtesy authorships are unacceptable and a part of scientific misconduct. But unfortunately, it happens a lot. So when submitting your papers, you are asked to indicate what type of research paper it is. Most of us will submit a full article. We call it an original research article. But most of the journals also allow for a letter or a short communication, where the short communication, for example, you hardly ever see it, but short communication is there to allow for what sometimes is called a reply paper. So there is some original work that you have read and you feel that, hey, something here I would like to comment on. You could submit a short communication or reply to the journal in response to a certain part, a certain article in that journal. So that's part of that self-correction, I would say. Then the review paper is not necessarily original research, but it is an extended literature review or some meta-analysis where you present all the work that you found in a certain topic and you really bring that together, which is a lot of work and it's very respected and very difficult to do. Yeah, but it's called a review paper and not an original research paper. And then we have the full articles, which most of us will do. And then finally, you have the book reviews. And I'm showing you one here on the right-hand side that I published some years ago, where I was asked to read a book and comment on it as a scientist. So I read it from a scientific point of view and I commented on it. And the one on the left, article on the left, and I'm glad Abisai is here because you can see Abisai and myself are part of an author team of a large publication with I think 26, 28 authors, which is quite uncommon in transport studies, but we were part of a COVID study where you can actually a huge team of people who have all contributed certain parts of this paper, and that became original research. So now about finding the right journal. So first of all, you need to, of course, you consider the type of article you're writing. Let's assume it's an original research. And you look at the topic, you look at the work that you've done. The first thing I would do is check the references in your own article and maybe in the technical report that you wrote earlier for possible journals of interest or possible journals that fit the scope of your work. Yeah. Then you go to the journal, you read the journal aims, the scope on the journal homepage. So all journals have a homepage. If they don't have it, I would not even trust the journal. Yeah. And then especially if you become a bit more senior, I would check the journal metrics. So how good is the journal? What's its impact? Who does it try to reach? What is the speed, the review and publication time? And with that, you kind of shortlist a number of journals. And then what you do is you for example, in transport, you look at its impact, yeah, whereby impact at journal level is measured in two ways. One is what we call a scientific journal ranking, which shows the average number of citations to any article in the journal over the last 3 years, and then normalized per discipline. So for transport, you would have a transport SJR, and for example, in the list on the right-hand side, the Research in Transportation Economics journal has an SJR of around 1. So that is kind of regarded the average journal in transport, and journals with a higher SJR would then be considered a higher impact journal. What is more common is that you look at journals in terms of their impact factor or their 5-year impact factor, which looks at the average article citation over the last 2 or last 5 years. So it looks across all the articles in the journal and not just the number of citations to any article in the journal. So the IF, or the impact factor, is most commonly used to show which journals are important. So up to a couple of years ago, the Institute for Transport and Logistics Studies of the University of Sydney would publish on their website a listing of what they considered the different impact, the high impact journals in transport, and it would distinguish 4 tiers that you could look at when deciding on the journal. And I used that a lot in the past, and it would typically target the tier 3 journals, because the tier 4 are sometimes very hard to get into. Yeah, but this list, unfortunately, it's not been updated anymore since COVID. But it is a very useful list to see, well, first of all, to see what kind of journals there are in transport and how they are doing in terms of their impact. So once you've decided on a short list of journals, then look at the journal homepage. So Transport Reviews, for example, I would look at the citation metrics. So how is it doing in that term? So this is quite a high impact journal, 10.1. It's relatively high, and their speed, acceptance rate says something about how long does it take from submission to first decision. How long does it typically take from submission to a first post-review decision? So you see 80 days, for example, and how long does it then take once accepted to get it published? Yeah, and what you can see here that in Transport Review, whatever happens, you can count on 3 to 4 months before you see something. The reality is actually that most journals take longer than this. What is also important here is that 7% acceptance rate. So that shows that out of 100 articles, only 7 will ever get published. So in other words, 93 get rejected. Look carefully at the journal aim. Yeah. So, for example, Transport Geography, that I sit on as an associate editor, yeah, obviously is looking at the geographical dimensions of transport, travel, and mobility. So the first thing every reviewer or the editor-in-chief or me as an associate editor will look at is, does this article have some kind of geography in it before we actually send it out for reviews? So that's important to check. Does it fit your research? Too often a paper comes back after 2-3 months and the reviewers say, no, actually doesn't fit the scope of the journal, hence we should reject it. Yeah? So avoid that by checking the journal aims up front. What I also like to do is actually look at the editorial board. So who are the editors, but more importantly, who are the board members? And usually there are 20 to 30 board members. And if you do not recognize any name, it should actually tell you something about the journal vis-a-vis your work. Yeah. If you recognize names and recognize them from the citations that you make, then this is probably a very good journal. In fact, as an associate editor myself, if I receive an article and I can see that 1 or 2 board members are mentioned or cited a lot in their publication, the first thing I do is invite them to be the reviewers. So if you cite people, they might very well become the reviewers of the same article. So then Robert asked me to say a few words about open access versus paid journals. And that's actually a very complicated landscape that we find ourselves in nowadays. So open access journals are relatively new, and they refer to freely available digital online content. So those are scientific articles that everyone with an internet connection should be able to download and have access to. Yeah. But there is a downside to this, is that these journals and these articles typically charge the researchers or the scholars, read you yourselves, for publishing their findings. So as much as I like the idea of giving open access to my work, if you have to pay $1.5 to $10,000 to get that open access, many of us do not have those funds to publish open access. So that's the flip side of it. So open access means that the article is no longer behind a paywall. If it's with Elsevier or Taylor and Francis or some of the larger publishing houses, you will see that only those who subscribe, typically the libraries or a person for one single article, will have to pay for it. So that means that research that you've done with government subsidy or with a VREF subsidy or whatever is actually not accessible to everyone, to society. So that's the downside of paid subscriptions. But obviously, as a researcher, you don't have to pay to publish because you give the copyright to the publishing house. When we look at open access, there are 4 categories. So you have gold open access, which means it is you pay to have it published. Some journals, particularly the big publishing houses, offer what they call hybrid open access, meaning that as an author, when submitting, you can either choose to pay yourself for the article, and so it's open to everyone. For example, the University of Cape Town supports that. So UCT would give me a subsidy around $1,000 to $1,500 to get it open access, to make it an open access publication. But if it's more, if the charges are higher, then I have to pay the difference. So then I need to find a funder who can help me afford to publish it open access. Then green open access allows you, it is a paid, there's a payment wall, but the journal allows you to publish an earlier version of your manuscript, so before the peer review, on your own platform. So green open access means the official publication is somewhere with Elsevier or Taylor and Francis, but you are still allowed to distribute your article within your own group. Then diamond open access is free. So that's free open access. There are no publication charges. And typically that happens when there is a funding organization behind a specific journal or a specific special issue, for example. Then predator journals, something I would like to warn you against. So predatory publishing is exploitive academic publishing model, and it exists a lot, where actually you are either approached by or you think you are submitting your article for peer review, but in reality all they do as an organization is superficially checking your articles for some level of quality or structure and legitimacy, but they actually not providing you with a solid peer review. And so this whole scientific publishing principles are not applied. And so these publishing services are actually should not be used, yeah, whether they are open access or not. And actually I checked a few days ago, there's a list of predatory journals and there are a few hundreds of them. And the fact that they exist means that still a lot of us are actually publishing in those journals. But the reality is that they do not undergo a proper peer review. But interestingly, looking at this, MDPI, maybe you've heard about MDPI, is a new publishing house, relatively new, but it was listed previously as a predatory publisher. Yeah. So not all these predatory publishers remain being exploitive, and some can come out, as is the case with this particular publishing house. Yeah. And interestingly, you can see it, Abisai and myself have actually published in journals of MDPI, which which has now taken on these large publishing houses. Yeah. Their business model is different from Elsevier and Taylor and Francis, that they typically work through what they call special issues. So they make an academic, like myself, responsible for collecting journal articles and for doing the whole peer review. And then they are just the publishers, and they force me to follow a certain standard of peer review. So what is this peer review process exactly? So obviously you first submit your paper. So you have done your paper, you've written it, you submit it, and you submit it with a cover letter. Very importantly, and I will talk about this in a minute. Yeah, the cover letter explains why you're submitting to this journal, in a few words, what you're going to present and why it is original. Yeah. Then, if accepted by the editor, if the editor accepts that cover letter and your paper, they will send it out for peer review to typically 2 or more invited reviewers who will look at the validity, the significance, the originality, and other sorts of improvements or other aspects of your submission. They will give report back to the editor, and the editor will then conclude or make a verdict whether they will accept the paper, they will accept with minor or major revisions, reject the paper, or advise an article transfer, for example, because it doesn't fit the scope of the journal. Well, this may take 1 or 2 rounds, typically not more than 2 rounds, and then hopefully by that time it is an accept, or eventually you might get a reject, which is the most frustrating part. We have spent like 2 rounds of peer review and then end up with only comments and not a publication. But if you're successful, it will be impressed by the publisher, being open access or a paywall publisher. They will print it. Some journals still print a hard copy, but most of them will publish it online. And most of them will then still allow you to distribute it via your personal channels, subject to some kind of embargo, typically a couple of months. So you may have heard about double-blind peer review. So double-blind peer review means that, except me as the editor, the reviewers who I invite, I know who the reviewers are, and they will not know who you are. So they don't know you as the author, and you as the author, when you get your review reports, you don't know who the reviewers are. That means in 2 directions, it's blind peer review. It's only me as the editor who knows both parties. So what I do is I receive, and I do that every week at least a morning. Yeah, I receive new editor assignments. Yeah, and I review the submission. I read the abstract and the keywords. I maybe scroll through the article quickly. Then I decide that, okay, this is kind of the scope of the work, and then I invite reviewers. So Elsevier, for example, at the moment, they even have an artificial intelligence module that recommends reviewers based on a quick screening of the submission, and they give me a whole list of people that I might think about for inviting. So I recommend or I invite reviewers and ask them to look at the significance, validity, and originality of the work. They send me a report after 1 or 2 months. I read the reports. Unfortunately, quite often they're contradictory. So then I need to go back to the article and make my own decision based on the reports, or sometimes even ask for a third opinion. Then I come back to you and I tell you, okay, I'm accepting it with minor revisions. So that's usually a couple of days work, or it's a major revision. It's a lot of work, or it's a reject, where I say, sorry, the article didn't make it, but it didn't make it on a number for a number of reasons. And we try to stipulate those reasons, and that can actually help you improve the article and go for a next round. Yeah? Typically, you will have 1 or 2 rounds before there needs to be a final verdict. The cover letter. Again, that's my experience. I do read the cover letters, and I as an editor, the reviewers don't see the cover letter. So it's the editor who receives who's the first one to receive the article, reads the cover letter. We do read them. We read them to see, okay, what is this work? What is it about? And why do you think it needs to be published in my journal? Yeah. And you make a number of declarations about it being original, it being ethical, it being not submitted to other journals, etc. So what I try to do here is to list the kind of things I would expect in the cover letter. Yeah? So editor names, you greet, of course, you mention the title of your manuscript, you explain why you did the research, what is it about, what are the highlights, why is it so interesting to the readers of this particular journal. And then you promise that it's exclusive, that everyone has approved it, that is compliant with ethics and all sorts of other things. You may point to potential reviewers in the cover letter or separate on the submission system. It's very important to take this letter serious. And I'm happy to send you a few copies of the standard letters that I have. Then in the peer review process, you get into a system of typically, it's only hardly ever happens that your paper gets accepted immediately. So you will have to revise. You have to revise a few times. So what you must do is you must see the feedback that you get from the reviewers as a gift, as free supervision. Yeah? So what you do, you read it carefully and you provide a detailed response, also called a rebuttal, to all of the reviewer comments. Yeah? Preferably you list it like here in an Excel sheet, which I typically make. I say reviewer 1 says this, I copy their comments, I give my response, how I respond to their comments, and then I indicate what my action is. What am I changing to the paper? Yeah? If you provide it like a table like this, if the journal allows, you really make the work of the reviewers much easier. So their response is probably quicker and more likely also more positive. Sometimes you do it more in a letter format, like on the right-hand side. But it's important that you respond to everything and you try to be polite. Yeah? Even if you disagree, you are allowed to disagree, but you remain professional. Yeah, I've seen people responding like, you reviewers, you don't understand what you're saying. And unsurprisingly, the reviewer then rejects your paper. And as an editor, I need to protect the reviewers. So I will probably follow the reject of the reviewer if it does make sense. Yeah. What is an unfortunate truth is that reviewers tend to fish, what I call fishing for citations. And that's a difficult thing. And so what the reviewer does is say, oh, I like the work, but I've not seen you refer to articles A, B, C, D. And quite often, at least one or two of those articles are actually articles by the reviewer themselves, who's fishing for citations. Most times it's a good suggestion. Most times it fits the scope of the article because the reviewer probably works in the same field. But if it doesn't make sense at all, just dare to say it. Yeah? It happened to me in an article many years ago where the editor actually said it's accepted provided you mention these 4 articles, yeah, in his own journal by himself. Yeah? That's unethical behavior, and you should be brave enough to say, then I rather see a reject. It's just not acceptable. Then you resubmit with an updated cover letter. You provide the track changes, and if applicable, you provide a language editing certificate. Yeah? Don't forget to update the cover letter and make sure you do a track changes version of the document. It makes the life of the reviewers much easier. I'm almost done, Robert. I know my time is just finished. So cost of publication, professional editing services, they must come with a certificate. So many times, if English is not your first language, like in my case, it happens that reviewers say, okay, I like the article, but the English should be edited. Yeah, most publishing houses offer an editing service, like $100, which is a lot of money, but $100 for a proper English language editing, and it typically applies to all the revisions as well. So the editing service extends till you have an accepted article. And even they offer a manuscript editing where they help you to work with the structure. It's a lot of money. Open access publication, as I said, article processing charges can be anything between $1,000 and $10,000 per publication, money which most of us don't have. Or if you go through a conference, then obviously you need to register for the conference, which will cost you money as well. Final thoughts on publishing your research. Reporting is difficult, of course. Good writing is difficult. Saying the right thing is difficult. Finding the right phrases and words is difficult. So writing is actually difficult. Let's acknowledge that. What you need to do is take enough time to write and revise and do it as a team. Yeah. So you have co-authors, use them, not just send a final product, but make them write together. And that really makes it much, much easier and a nicer journey as well. A few words on getting cited or getting excited as an academic, because publishing is our bread and butter. So whether you like it or not, we need to do it, and preferably you publish in high impact journals. Yeah? So how can you attract citations? So you use keywords in the title, abstract, and in the keyword section that you think are best describing your work. Yeah? You create a personal website to publish your working papers, your preprints, your work in progress, to get known, to make sure that the world knows that you're out there doing this work. Yeah? Next time they see your article, they remember, that's that person, he or she is the authority, let's cite. Mention your recent articles in your email footer. I don't do that myself, but I know Karel Martens, also a VREF scholar, does it very consistently. He mentions in the footer of his publication, he says where he's teaching or where he's lecturing, what his newest articles are, and with a link to it. And it makes that people are actually finding him and citing him all the time. Make sure your work is listed in online repositories, which are generally free of charge. So ResearchGate, academia.edu, Archive. And of course, I hope all of you have a Google Scholar profile, because that's the go-to place for most academics to check out on your recent work. Of course, you go to conferences as much as you can, you present your work, and don't be shy. Talk to other academics about your work. Make them known with your work. Use social media and blogs if you're into that, can help as well. And what is also nice, if you're brave enough, send your article. Once you have the article, send it to the people you're actually citing in your paper, the key people, and say, hey, I've actually contributed to your work, I've built on your work, and actually most academics will be very flattered to see that their work is used for your work to grow. All right, my last slide, it's about author metrics. So why am I stressing so much that citations are important? In the early days, publications were important. So most universities would look at how many publications do you have. Nowadays, some universities don't care about how many publications you have, but they want to know how impactful are your publications. Yeah? So even if you have a few, if they're impactful, it actually counts more than whether you have a lot. So quality versus quantity. So to get tenure in most academia, you will need to have consistent high quality scholarly output and performance. So it's typically measured through what they call an H-index or Hirsch index, which is the number of publications with a citation number greater than or equal to H. So the H-index, if you have an H-index of 10, it means that you have written 10 articles that have been cited 10 times or more. Another metric that is often used is the I-10 metric, typically by Google Scholar, which relates to the number of publications with at least 10 citations. So what I put here is my Google Scholar, where you can see H-index is 27, meaning I have 27 of all my publications have been cited at least 27 times. So that's quality versus quantity, whereas 60 publications have been cited 10 times or more. So that's more quantity metric. Whereas if you now go to Scopus, it's another indexing house, you actually find that my H-index is much lower. It's only 19. How come? because Scopus only looks at peer-reviewed work, whereas Google Scholar looks at any citation to my work, even if it's by a non-peer-reviewed source. So that's the difference. Sorry for taking more time, but this is all I wanted to say. So I've taken you through a journey, starting at what scientific publication is all about. I warned you for the ethics and professional part of publication. Then we talk about what it takes to publish articles. And then finally, what does it take to be seen and to be cited, which is an essential part of your academic journey. And I thank you very much.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much, Mark. What a presentation, what a journey. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you had to cut down on your presentation. And I'm sure everybody will agree with me. We may need a part 2 of the same. And like my colleague Robert says, I'm sure everybody has picked your golden nuggets. You know, we have learned so much, I must say. So the next session of our forum this afternoon, we have a group discussion. But before we go into breakaway sessions, Mark, allow me to take some few questions from the chat. So one, is it necessary for review papers, such as systematic review papers, to have a literature review part? Is it necessary for review papers, such as systematic review, to have a literature review part? I'll just read I think 4 or 5 questions, then you can see what you can respond to. The second question, which of the following should be considered first when writing an article for publication? Which of the following should be considered first when writing an article for publication? 1, choosing a journal before writing, or writing the paper first before choosing a journal. Then, can you submit a conference paper for journal publication? Can you submit a conference paper for journal publication? Then someone is asking, how can we avoid the risk of publishing in a fake journal? And how can we evaluate the quality of the journal? How can we avoid the risk of publishing in a fake journal? And how can we evaluate the quality of journal? And lastly, do you have any recommendations for places to have final manuscripts edited? Do you have any recommendations for places to have final manuscripts edited? This is for Mark and all of us who can comfortably respond to some of these issues. Thank you so much, Mark. Welcome.
Thank you, Paschalin. So I will be very brief. Very good questions, by the way. So the first one, the review paper, whether the review paper needs a literature review. I think the review paper, in essence, is a literature review, but it's a very systematic literature review. And sometimes it even has what they call a meta-analysis aspect, where, for example, it's about a certain topic and you review 10 papers that try to deal with the same thing, and you try to describe the similarities and the differences between those 10 papers on that particular topic. They call it meta-analysis. So the short answer is, I think a review paper is actually a large literature review. Maybe Jane can come in here later, because I know from her background, it's more common to do such things. The journal before the writing, very good point. I think the answer is easy. Obviously, I would always have some idea which platform I'm using. Yeah, because as I said, you would like to try to cite work in the same journal in your article. If you struggle to do that, it should be a sign that actually the journal is probably not fit for your work. If you can't even find a single paper in that journal that relates to your work, it's probably not the right journal. So it's a chicken and an egg, the situation. So I would normally have some idea of 1 or 2 journals that the work is going to fit in. Actually, what I do personally, and what I recommend my students as well, actually find a good article in that journal already. Yeah, read it carefully, analyze it carefully, and actually see what kind of structure they are using. Yeah, so it helps you actually in writing. Conference paper to journal. It depends, but in general, the answer would be no. If it's published in the journal and in the conference, it is published, and published work is, you have to declare that it's not published elsewhere. So you have to be careful here. I do know for a fact that one of the conferences that I go to, and Abisai as well, the Choice Modeling Conference, they deliberately do not have a published proceeding. They do all their publications through special issue journals. Yeah, so you can opt out for those special issue journals and just say, okay, I presented it, and I'm actually going my own way and submit it to some journal. Yeah. It, however, is available as a PowerPoint and as a paper on the website of the journal, but behind a registered delegate wall. If that's the case, I think it's legit to submit it to a journal as well, but you have to be very careful. It's a slippery slope here. Then I think the fourth one about how do I know it's a fake journal? It's a very good point. I think Google is probably your best answer. You search around a bit, but as I said in preparing for this forum, I discovered that the MDPI was mentioned earlier as a predatory publisher, and then I discovered that I have 4 articles with MDPI, but luckily it's cleared now as a publishing house, but it has predatory behavior. So you have to just carefully see, does it have a peer review system? Yeah, if your paper comes back after 24 hours with an accept and a bill and invoice of paying $500, then you can be sure it's predatory. It hasn't been sent to Robert Ambunda for peer review. It's been done internally in the office, by some perhaps scientists. It could be scientists, but they're not your peers for that topic. The quality of the journal, I would recommend looking at that Sydney University listing and to get some ideas about the top journals. And the very top, Paschalin, I'm very honest with you. If you go to Transportation Research Part B, you can try 100 times. It's very unfortunate. Our type of work that we do in this kind of VREF forum, the work that I do doesn't get published there. I've tried a few times. They are not open to our context, to our data challenges. They just want pure, highly mathematical work. So I would not even go there. Just go to tier 3 and 2. There are good journals there that are peer reviewed, that you can be very proud of when you're publishing in those. And that's good quality. And the last question I didn't get, sorry, the fifth one. There was a fifth one.
Do you have any recommendations for places to have final manuscripts edited?
Oh yeah, well, it depends a bit on your budget. So the one with Elsevier and Taylor Francis are actually quite good. It's in the order of $100 US. The good thing is that they give you the certificate. So as an editor, if I give a revision based on a language editing requirement, then I want to see that actually it is language edited. So that certificate is very important, and it would cost you $100 to get. Sometimes it is not a requirement. It happened to me a couple of times. And then in Cape Town, I can find people who do it for nothing or a small token of appreciation because they're native speakers, they're in this university. They say, let me help you out. But it doesn't give you the certificate.
Thanks, Prof. Before I let you go, one more question. I know we are running out of time, but could you please advise on the key ingredients of a good conclusion for an article? Could you please advise on the key ingredients of a good conclusion for an article?
Actually, I have a whole presentation on that, which I'm happy to do if the forum wants, but not now. I need to prepare for it. But like the number one thing, and it really, when you write your conclusions, don't shy away in your draft to actually repeat your objectives or your research questions. So technically you are responding in your discussion, or maybe there's more in your discussion. First and foremost, you're responding to your research questions. I would keep them in the draft and just check whether you are actually responding to all of them, yeah, and then remove them in your final version. Make sure it flows as a good narrative. In your conclusion, you go one step further. You're basically concluding on the overall work and its contribution to science that you wanted to make. So if you have a research aim or objective, if you have specified that, I think the conclusion would be really at that level, whereas the discussion is at the level of the individual research questions that speak to your data and findings, that speak to the literature, that speaks to the problem. So it's that structure that should always go back. And I tell you once more, the reviewers and the editors, they read this, they are reading that structure. If they don't see it, you get it back. But as I said, be grateful for comments on reviewers, because if they pick it up, yeah, they reject your paper and they say, I rejected it because I can see a set of questions here and I see no conclusions that speak to the questions, then you know you have to go back to the drawing board, fix your paper and submit it somewhere else.
Wow, I can't thank you enough, but we don't have more time. I would like to ask that we take the questions that are coming through to the discussion or to the other plenary after the breakaway session. So allow me at this moment to request Robert. Robert, please take us to the breakaway sessions. Tell us what is expected of us. Robert.
Let me thank Mark again for that great presentation. I think you've got us thinking and in many ways better prepared for the publication process. You know, for me, especially selecting a journal has been, or it feels like picking a needle from a haystack. But from your presentation, I think I now have a better guide on how to pick journals in order to make sure that my work is published in the right journal and reaches the right audience. So taking from your presentation, I would like us to canvas the following breakout topics. I think Karin will assist us in breaking out into groups. For the first room, we'll talk about possible publication pathways, how to get started, what works and what doesn't. For room 2, we'll talk about getting cited and specifically on what are the strategies for getting seen and what are the experiences of these strategies. So we'll be sharing more in that particular room. And then room 3, we'll talk about strategies for publishing in low library resources, where you are in a highly competitive research environment. So we'll have about 20 to 25 minutes to get into our groups to discuss, and then we'll come back to the main session and then we'll report back after that. So Karin, please assist us into getting into groups.
Yes, you will automatically be divided into groups, and I also added the topics in the chat. If you want to take a look and maybe copy them, so to have as a reminder for the discussion. So I will now open the breakout rooms and see you in 20 or 25 minutes. Where are we on that?
20 minutes, I guess.
20 minutes? Yes.
20 minutes.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Yeah, and there will be a reminder when you have 5 minutes left.
And we have facilitators in each room, so.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. As you take us to our breakaway sessions, can we get rapporteurs for each group so that they can come and report after the breakaway? Thank you.
Karin?
Yes.
I will join one of the rooms to see if it's working
Yes.
well, and then I will come back here.
Yeah, I can be back here to guide people. So everyone is assigned to go somewhere. And Robert is in one room, Jane is in one room, and Paschalin in another room.
Oh, that's great. Oh. So I will join room 3.
Oh, yeah, great. Oh, you're sneezing.
I hope it's not
Okay.
falling left. I hope it's not fallen. See you soon.
Okay, yeah, let's hope not. See you soon. Welcome
Hi,
back,
Karen.
everyone.
Hi,
you,
Karen.
7 seconds, and then everyone will be here.
Yeah.
Great, perfect, Karen. Thank you.
I'm back.
Wow, I'm looking at my time. I don't know how much time we have to have the presentations and wrap up. Jen?
Yeah, are we going to have a short report back from the groups, or do you want to just go ahead to the wrap up?
I think let's give them 1 or 2 minutes to just report back. And, yeah.
Okay, fine.
And then Mark maybe can come in if there's anything real quick toward the end, so fine.
Yeah.
Group 1 then. Possible publication pathways, sharing how to get started, what works, some of the main points from that discussion.
Who is reporting for group 1, please?
We can take the lead from group 3 and then we just move downwards.
Okay.
Exactly. Thanks. Polycarp, please.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we were working on what strategies we can use in order to publish in a low environment, a low library resource environment in a competitive research world. And we deliberated, and these are some of the points that we came out with. The first one, we talked about collaboration, which is key, in which young researchers can try as much as possible to collaborate with senior researchers in order to get more insight on their work, and with other collaborators or mates, so that they can actually bring some input into their work. We equally thought of trying to get into search engines, downloading useful materials that is necessary for your work. We thought of being up to date in what is happening around the world, some of the interesting issues around the world, and and structuring your topic to reflect what is happening around the world so that people can be interested in what you are struggling to do. We had mentorship where you can get someone to mentor you, to guide you in the research process. We equally talked about attending conferences, workshops, sharing your ideas before actually compiling them into a publishable paper. And generally, I think those are the few points that we had from our end. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Polycap.
Yeah.
I think we also had group 3 and we had room 3 rather, and we had Nama as a repertoire for our group. Perhaps Nama, you can just add on to what Polycap has mentioned if we missed a point.
All right, that's okay. Thank you. So from our group, we're talking about the strategies for publishing in low library resources. And as we know, in most African countries, our institutions, we do not have the library resources. We can try to get a paper or an article that you need to reference, but you cannot get it if your institution is not does not have those resources. So the key takeaways were that the first thing that you can do is to email the author so that they can send you their papers. So usually they do respond, but we've had some people who have been struggling to get responses from the authors. So that's one way for navigating this. And the second one is to try to get someone who is at an institution that can access that article for you. Though this has been mentioned to be sort of in a gray area or not very legal, but I think in our conditions, that's something that most of us are doing in order to get the references, the papers that we need. And besides that as well, we've talked a little bit about just the low resources in general. Things like when you're doing data collection, trying to get the right sample is different for us in some situations compared to the first world. So at the end of the day, you might see yourself having low sample sizes than some of the first world cities like Amsterdam or New York. So in that case, we've been advised to write in your cover letter, explain the conditions for your data collection procedures so that you won't get, your paper won't get rejected, but will be accepted. So those are just the few takeaways from our group.
All right, thank you, Nama. Any reportings from group 2, the repertoire?
Yes, I was the secretary on that group, actually. Just a few points from that very good discussion. It's very important for the first thing to do work that is impactful in high impact journals, but also work on topics that we're really passionate about. So you have the goal of being the best in your field and you really want to get out the message because that does influence your final project, of course. It's important with good open access. It's a contested area. It depends on what type of access you have. So be careful about what type of open access opportunities and journals you have. A major point was also made, the importance of sharing our references to our work on various platforms, on social media, email signatures, as was mentioned, maybe LinkedIn, other times, other type of platforms. Sometimes it can be hard to reach an audience, especially if it's a narrow audience, in which case it becomes even more important to use multiple forums. Another point was to be very clear in your article, particularly with the keywords that you use, because if you have a very clear focus, it helps people to find you, not just all over there, but being very focused on that. We also talked about the value of kind of having a generous citation strategy yourself, particularly citing across the board, not just established scholars, but also cite other young scholars' work to indicate what's going on most recently in terms of new perspectives. So those were some of the ideas there, and thank you very much for a good discussion.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jane. Anyone from group 1 on possible publication pathways? I think we might have all crowded into the room 2 and room 3, but let's leave that as homework. I think I'll be sure to email all of you to make some submissions on room 1. Mark, could you possibly give us some final words, some observations, and what the way forward is for us, especially young scholars, in terms of taking on the publication process?
Thank you so much, Robert, and thank you to all the groups, because that feedback is actually very, very good, and especially the last thing that Jane was just reporting on, cite other young scholars. I've never thought about it, but that's actually very good. We can help each other. If we are a community, we can, and we make sure that we're all publishing good stuff, and let's help each other, cite each other, as long as it's, of course, relevant to your paper. So, or even let's co-publish. So let's pull together resources and say, okay, can we do a comparative paper across West, East, North, and Southern Africa? So, and I guess that's typically what the VREF is wanting us to do in any case. So let's look into that. Yeah, and just I want to compliment you, especially if you are in the continent doing all this research, trying to publish. And we just spoke in our group about all the barriers to actually find that paper. Whereas if you're in South Africa or in Germany or in Sweden, you just click on Science Direct and Taylor Francis, and you get your 80 papers. And some of you will have to go to some funny DIY repositories that we all know are very illegal. But okay, yeah, you do what is needed to get your research out, because if you're not able to provide a literature review in your paper, good context and identification of where your research fits, it will be desk rejected immediately. Unfortunately, that is the case. And I really want to ask VREF to consider a discussion which we just started in our group, which goes beyond the purpose of today, but is actually doing research in a low data environment, or in a resource poor environment, to actually get your data. Yeah, that's probably worth another discussion. And I've got some experience there where I didn't get work published because some northern, western, or whatever you call it, reviewers do not understand, appreciate the context in which good research was done. It was absolutely good research, nothing wrong with it, but the sample size was like a quarter of what you would normally see in Stockholm or other places. So that couldn't be good. Yeah, and well, I failed there, but I couldn't get the authors or the editors to accept that this was the reality. So what I started doing ever since is be very explicit, as Robert said, in the cover letter and in the paper itself, that actually this is part of the research, is to try and do things in this particular context. I know there's a lot of papers coming to my journal at the moment from the KNUST Track Center, and sometimes I see that appreciation is not made explicit, and you should do that. You say, okay, I only had 411 observations, but this is what it took to get 411. Then suddenly I think, hey, this is not Tokyo, where you can just download it from an online repository. You actually had to go out on the street to get that data. So that's maybe worth another discussion at some point. But I really enjoyed today. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. And we've really been happy to have you here. You've shared a lot of, as I say with my colleagues, a lot of golden nuggets, and we've all gotten a chance to take away something that we can use in terms of our publishing strategies, and I think generally just to improve the quality of our papers going forward. Without saying so many words, let me give Jane the final chance to say goodbye to us. And I think, yeah, on behalf of VREF, yeah.
Thanks very much. I will start by asking everyone to please come on with your cameras if possible, so we can all wave to each other and get the kind of feeling that we're in the same room. Also, thank you very, very much to Mark for an excellent presentation, to Robert and Paschalin for wonderful moderating leadership, keeping us pretty much at the time, despite all the richness of the conversation. Also, Karen and Vanessa for being our technical facilitators. That's wonderful. One thing before we go, VREF does offer scholarships for study grants to go from your home university to spend time at another university. So if you're considering working on a comparative paper and you would like to be able to sit down at the same desk with someone working in the same field and perhaps
Okay.
work toward a co-authored paper, go out on the homepage and find out about our study grants and apply. We're
You
very
have a
generous.
link in the chat.
Good.
Oh,
Great.
fantastic.
Thanks, Karen. We also have, Karen will be sharing a small feedback survey right after this presentation. So please go on and take a few minutes of your time to answer the questions in that survey. Anything else, Paschalin and Robert, you want to ask, or are we ready to go?
Can I say one thing?
Yes, Mark.
Okay, Mark.
Good. So I'm one of those who is really willing to download papers for you. So if you submit a list of DOI, so clickable, that I immediately go to the paper, I'm happy to sit down 10 minutes and download 100 papers for you and send it to you. I know it's not legal, but I think we are a community, we can do that. So please make use of that. And then, Jane, am I allowed to remind people that the conference is coming to Cape Town, and we need all of you to come to Cape Town 5 to 7 March next year, and an updated call for papers will be published hopefully on Thursday or by the end of this week, with a small extension for abstracts. And please all make your way to Cape Town and we can continue this discussion.
Yes, and I just